Now that you have learned about the network model and data management, the next lesson will focus on the visualization of objects and data within vZoom. Professionals rely on mapping tools to explain, interpret, and convey complex information to a variety of audiences. The display of network objects and attribute information are defined in vZoom by graphic parameters. Several tools are available to us that allow us to control how we see a transportation model constructed in vZoom. Let's learn the basics about these tools. To view and edit the graphic parameter settings, you may select Graphic Parameters in the Graphics menu with a left mouse click. You may also open this window by selecting the Edit Graphics layer icon. Here we will go ahead and open the Graphic Parameters window by selecting the Edit Graphics layer icon with a left mouse click. Take a look at this dialog box. It is organized into two principal sections. On the left is an outline of the editable objects. Some objects have sub-items. We can left-click on the plus symbol to expand the outline under these objects. The one we are currently working with is highlighted in gray. The panel on the right is where the parameters are established. We are working with how network items are layered. In this window, we can see if an object is drawn in our current view, whether we have a legend active, and the order in which all network objects are drawn. In vZoom, items at the bottom of the layer listing are drawn first. Each subsequent layer is stacked upon the last, in the order shown in the layer listing. We can re-establish the layering of items by selecting the object in the layer column or the layer number with a left mouse click. Then, using the arrows in the upper right portion of the dialog, move the highlighted layer up or down. We also have the option to turn on or off all the items in the listing. Once we have modified our parameters, we may want to see how changes appear before accepting them. Along the bottom right, there are three icons: OK, Cancel, and Preview. If we want to view our changes before we accept them, we left mouse click on Preview. You will notice that Edit Graphic Parameters dialog does not close, but may be moved by holding a left mouse click on the window bar along the top. After we see how these modifications appear, we can elect to discard them by clicking on Cancel. This will return the graphic parameters to the settings established when you entered this dialog. If we decide to accept the changes, we select OK. We will close the Edit Graphics Parameter window now with a left click on Cancel, so we can learn about some other features of the graphic parameters. vZoom has a Smart Map feature. The Smart Map displays our model boundaries and allows us to quickly shift our display of the network by holding down a left mouse click in Smart Map and dragging the window to our desired location. If you don't see the Smart Map and would like to, just go to the View menu, select Toolbars, and left mouse click on Smart Map. We can also save our current display by typing in a name for this view in the Select GPAR drop-down. The graphic parameter file will be saved where the .gpa files are mapped with your project directories. You can then access these graphic parameters files in the drop-down. Simply select the view and vZoom will toggle the settings to this view. Let's create a classified link display. vZoom allows us to open the Edit Graphic Parameter dialog with a right mouse click on the Network Objects in the Types tab. We can also choose to draw network objects as we did in the Layer window. We simply left-click on the object. When the object is drawn, it will be a light gray with red. If it is not layered, then it will be dark gray. Remember that if you ever forget, you may hover the mouse on an object for a reminder. We will toggle the links off and on again so you can see the change to the display. Now we will access the graphic parameters for links. First, we place our mouse on the link object and right mouse click. The Edit Graphic Parameters dialog opens as it did before, but notice that it opened in the links display. This context-sensitive feature is helpful and saves time as you become familiar with VZoom graphic parameters. First, let's look at all the items under links in the outline on the left. If we left-click on links, we can see if links are drawn. We can also see if we have link labels or bars established. This is where we set up attribute scaling and thematic mapping settings. For our example in this lesson, we want to establish the link bars and link bar labels. We will left-click these two items to make them actively drawn. Now left-click on Display under Links in the outline on the right. Network objects have graphic settings for items that are active, passive, and marked. Some, like links, have additional tabs for object-specific visualization. Left-click on the Active tab. Notice here we have more options. We can draw active links uniformly or classify them based upon an attribute. In the Active and Passive tabs, we decide if these items are drawn and if we would like to establish a scale for drawing certain items. Last, we choose how the link looks, line style, width, whether an arrowhead is drawn, or if we have a sign for the road. In the outline, click on the bars under Links. Here are general settings for how bars are drawn. Link bars in VZoom are scaled thematic mapping elements. We'll go ahead and open the bars outline with a left click and select Display. This dialog shows the settings for the link bars and their labels. The tabs along the top show the established settings for link attributes. If a tab is in red, then it is actively being drawn. If it's in black, then that attribute is not drawn. To toggle this, you left-click on the Draw Bar checkbox when that tab is selected. You select a tab with a left click or use the arrows that point left and right in the upper right corner of the window. The plus and minus icons next to the arrows add or delete tabs from this dialog window. The type of display is defined under the tabs. You may view the attribute as is using Standard, but you can also use the difference to subtract one attribute from another in VZoom. Near the upper left, we'll highlight the scaling row with the left click. This allows us to select the attribute to be scaled as well as how we establish the widths. To select an attribute, left-click the scaling attribute icon. This opens up a window that contains all the link attributes. We're going to select the Free Flow Speed attribute, which in VZoom is V0PRT. To find it quickly, we can list the attributes in alphabetical order by clicking on the blue icon on the upper right. Once we navigate to the speed attribute, select it with a left click and then left-click OK at the bottom of the link attribute window. Now the attribute is written in the scaling attribute icon. We can have VZoom select automatic limits for our scaling, but instead we'll choose Standard and set the minimum as 0 and the maximum as 70. Below this, we will set our maximum width at 4 mm and round to the nearest single digit. We can set the decimal places to 0. Under the scaling in the upper left, we highlight Label to set up how labels are drawn. In the text display, we can choose to show the value, unit, and title of the attribute. Here, we'll choose the value by making sure its checkbox is filled. We can also select to hide small and negative values to keep the graphic uncluttered. At the bottom, we can choose items for the text context as well. Here, we want the value of the scaling attribute selected. Now we are ready to go to the fill style. In this editor, you can decide if you want classified or uniform drawing. We want to draw the link bars classified based on free flow speed, so we'll choose the classified drawing mode with a left click. We can select the icon by left-clicking the icon just underneath the drawing mode. Here we choose Like Scaling Attribute, because the attribute in the scaling is already selected as the free flow speed. For setting up our classes, we can create each class individually, or we can use the automatic class definition wizard provided in vZoom. To open the wizard, left-click Set. Here we will establish our number of classes as 4, and our value range will be 0 for a minimum and 70 as the maximum. We will use a quantitative palette. Then select OK with a left click. Notice that 4 classes were returned. We will want to modify them. To do this, double left-click in Class column and set the first row to 0, the second to 30, the third to 45. The last will be established automatically. If you highlight a row, we can change the color for links in this class. Just left-click the color of the link. This opens a palette, and you left-click the color you will like, as well as settings to establish the fill style and boundaries. We'll change these colors so we can see the contrast between classes. Okay, now let's create names for the classes. This is helpful for legends, which is the next lesson. We will call the classes the speeds they use, but are completely user-defined. Just double left-click on the cell with the class row in the name column to type in the name. Let's view our settings by selecting Preview in the lower right corner. To retain this view and close the Edit Graphic Parameters, we will select OK. We'll save these parameters by typing link speed in the Select GPAR drop-down. When we create graphic displays, we need to understand how items are drawn and how to interpret them. To help us, we can establish a legend. Let's use the Legend wizard in vZoom to set up our legend. We open the wizard with a left mouse click on the legend icon. The first window of the Legend wizard dialog appears. In the columns on the left, we set if we want to include active objects under the Draw column. Also, we can add passive objects by selecting them under Passive. We layer the items from top to bottom. We use the arrows in the upper right to shift rows toward the top or bottom. On the left, we can toggle the legend on or off and specify the number of columns. We can toggle all objects in the list on or off as well. First, let's select All Off. Now we'll choose what we want contained in the legend. We'll left-click the following items in the Draw column: Nodes and Link Bars. Left-click Next to advance to the following window. We type in a title at the top. Select the title area and type a title. Then select the alignment of the title in the Legend window. You may also select the font for each legend item, its size and color. Now we will click Next. In this dialog, we establish the settings for the boundary, where the legend is drawn in the overall display, and how columns are established. If you left-click Help, the values for the vZoom-defined items are explained. We'll click Next to move to the next window. This window is the place where we define how large the symbols are in the Legend window and if we display the scaling and fill style for scaled objects. When we advance to the next window, we may establish our spacing between legend entries. The yellow highlight displays the spacing being modified. We left-click Finish, and our legend is drawn. Our last lesson with working with graphic parameters will be how to establish charts and tables. We'll begin with a right-click on the Zone object to get started. Under the Zones object, we have 3 items: Display, Table, and Chart. We use charts and tables to help display attribute data on objects that are a point, such as nodes, stop points, and zone centroids. To establish a chart, we left-click Chart under the Zones outline. We need to left-click the Draw Chart checkbox in the upper left and establish our display parameters. We'll choose a pie chart and set the pie area at 300 millimeters squared and the scaling from 0 to 500. Next, we need to establish the attributes being drawn. Left-click the Draw checkbox in the first two rows. This allows us to select attributes and parameters for these rows. In the top row, select the attribute icon and navigate to the Origin Traffic attribute. Leave the rounding at 1 and set the color as dark blue. In the next row, set the attribute as Destination Traffic and set its color as bright orange. We will want to left-click Zones on the left and layer the zone object. We will also make sure the Avoid Overlapping when drawing is checked off. Then, left-click on Preview to see your established settings for origin and destination traffic for zones. To create a table, return to the Edit Graphic Parameter dialog and go to Chart under Zones. Turn off the Draw Chart selection. Select Table under the Zones outline on the left. Here we establish parameters for creating a table of data for zones. Left-click on Draw Table in the upper left. We will set the distance of the table at 1 millimeter, the text size at 2 millimeters, and percentage of text size at 40. Under Column 1, we will set the text alignment for left in the drop-down and click the checkboxes in the first two rows to make them active. Our display in Column 1 is set to Title for both rows. Select this in the Display column drop-down. The attribute in the first row is chosen by left-clicking the Attribute Selector icon. Navigate to the Number attribute, then, in the second row, navigate to Origin Traffic. Under Column 2, we will repeat the same procedure as Column 1, but under the Display column, we will set to Value. Last, set the underline in the checkbox for row 1 between the two columns. Then, in the upper right, check Draw Frame. Left-click on Preview to view the result.